This guy's dog dies, right? He really loved his dog.
What? Check the panels, please.
It really is the truth. Ain't gonna set you free.
I've got a job. Maybe next month.
You collect on that scum.
Hollywood has never been more afraid than it is right now. In the last 6 years, the biggest studios on Earth poured billions of dollars into science fiction, the genre that once printed money, and watched it detonate in their hands over and over again. We are talking about 15 movies that were supposed to launch franchises and dominate the culture, only to vanish from theaters in a matter of weeks. And here's the thing. A few of these sci-fi bombs were genuinely brilliant. A few were disasters you could see coming a mile away, and at least one of them was funded by a filmmaking legend who gambled his own personal fortune just to get it made. What you are about to see is a countdown of greed, ego, bad timing, and spectacular miscalculation, ranked from the merely embarrassing all the way up to the most jaw-dropping financial wreck of the decade so far. These are the 15 biggest sci-fi box office bombs from 2020 to 2026, and the deeper we go, the worse it gets. Number 15. Chaos Walking, 2021.
Is it true? You're from Town?
Lionsgate bought the rights to Patrick Ness's Chaos Walking trilogy back in 2011, right when dystopian YA adaptations were printing money. The Hunger Games was still climbing. Divergent was on the horizon. On paper, the plan was simple: lock down a beloved book series, build a franchise, and ride the wave. But in reality, the wave crashed long before this film ever reached a theater. Behind the scenes, development crawled through years of script rewrites with a revolving door of writers. At one point, Charlie Kaufman was hired to draft a screenplay. His version was scrapped. Eventually, Doug Liman signed on to direct. Then there was the incredible cast. Tom Holland was cast opposite Daisy Ridley. Mads Mikkelsen, Cynthia Erivo, Nick Jonas, and Demian Bashir rounded out a cast loaded with firepower. Principal photography wrapped in late 2017, and then the silence started. Test screenings were so poorly received that Lionsgate deemed the original cut essentially unreleasable. The entire third act needed to be reshaped. In fact, reshoots could not begin until nearly 2 years after the cameras first rolled. Even Fede Alvarez was later brought in to oversee the new footage, adding an extra $15 million to an already swollen budget. The opening day arrived, and it was postponed. Dates after dates after dates. The initial opening day was slated for March 2019. The film was pushed to January 2021, then again to March 2021, where it was finally dumped into theaters during the pandemic with almost no marketing fanfare. Chaos Walking opened to just $3.7 million from nearly 2,000 screens. By the time it limped out of theaters, the worldwide gross sat at roughly $26 million against a production budget around $125 million. Number 14. 65, 2023. The pitch sounded bulletproof. Adam Driver fighting dinosaurs on prehistoric Earth. It was primal, it was high concept, and it came from the writers of one of the most profitable horror films of the decade. Scott Beck and Brian Woods wrote and directed. Sam Raimi produced. Sony bankrolled the whole thing. On paper, 65 should have been the kind of lean, mean genre film that punches well above its weight class. Instead, it punched itself in the face. The production budget landed at $45 million. During production, Beck and Woods shot for 10 weeks across Louisiana and Oregon, using the dense forests of Kisatchie National Forest to double as an alien planet that just happens to be Earth 65 million years ago. The concept itself was not time travel, despite what audiences assumed from the marketing. Driver plays a pilot from a distant civilization who crash lands and must protect a young girl while navigating a world full of Tyrannosaurus rexes and incoming asteroid doom. Greenblatt even learned a fictional alien language created specifically for the film. The ambition was there, but the marketing was muddled. The trailers gave away nearly every major set piece, and the movie opened the same weekend as Scream 6, which swallowed the horror audience whole with a franchise-best $44.5 million debut. 65 opened to just $12.3 million from over 3,400 theaters. It eventually crawled to $60.7 million worldwide. Number 13. Reminiscence, 2021.
When are we?
It's been years, Tamara.
When did I change?
Lisa Joy co-created Westworld, one of the most visually ambitious and narratively complex shows in television history. Her debut feature film carried that same DNA, from the cinematographer to the composer to two of the cast members. Reminiscence even brought back Paul Cameron, who shot Westworld's acclaimed pilot, and Ramin Djawadi, the composer behind the show's haunting score. Hugh Jackman starred alongside Rebecca Ferguson. Thandiwe Newton, Cliff Curtis, and Daniel Wu rounded out the ensemble. The talent was undeniable. The budget was around $68 million. The story is set in a future Miami, partially submerged by rising sea levels, where extreme daytime heat has forced the population into nocturnal lives. Jackman plays Nick Bannister, a man who operates a machine that lets clients relive their most treasured memories. When a mysterious woman named May walks in and then vanishes, Bannister spirals into obsession. One of the most striking sets was built inside the abandoned Six Flags theme park in New Orleans, the same park destroyed by Hurricane Katrina in 2005 and never rebuilt. A flooded market chase scene drew inspiration from the floating markets of Thailand that Joy had visited during her childhood summers. Reminiscence opened to just $2 million from 3,265 theaters. That was not a typo. $2 million. It set a record as the worst opening weekend in history for a film playing in more than 3,000 locations. The final worldwide gross barely crossed $16 million. Number 12. Moonfall, 2022.
You said when the swarm came back, it didn't attack the Endeavor, right?
That's right.
The electronics were out.
Roland Emmerich has destroyed the White House, frozen New York City, and cracked the Earth's crust open with a magnitude 10 earthquake. For 3 decades, he has been Hollywood's self-appointed master of disaster. Independence Day made over $800 million worldwide. 2012 crossed $750 million. The Day After Tomorrow cleared $500 million. So when Emmerich announced he was making a $140 million sci-fi epic about the moon falling out of orbit and crashing into Earth, it should have sounded exactly like the kind of spectacle that puts people in seats. But the problem was that by 2022, the world had already lived through its own real disaster, and nobody was lining up to watch another one. What makes Moonfall unusual is that it was one of the most expensive independently financed films ever produced. No major studio bankrolled it. Emmerich took the project to Cannes in 2019, where Scanline VFX produced a 90-second teaser of the moon rising behind the Earth with hints of destruction. That footage helped sell the film across the globe in a single market push. Emmerich himself held a 50% stake in the film. If it hit, half the profits were his. If it flopped, half the loss was too. Unfortunately, when Moonfall opened, it grossed just $10 million domestically. Estimates place the total loss at roughly $139 million. Number 11. The Creator, 2023. Gareth Edwards directed Godzilla in 2014 and Rogue One, a Star Wars story, in 2016. Both were massive commercial hits. Then he disappeared for 7 years. When he returned, he created The Creator, an original science fiction epic set where humanity is at war with artificial intelligence after a nuclear detonation leveled Los Angeles. On paper, this was prestige sci-fi with blockbuster muscle. What made The Creator genuinely revolutionary was how it was made. Edwards and cinematographer Greig Fraser chose to shoot the entire film on a Sony FX3. That is a camera you can buy at Best Buy for under $4,000. It was the first time a blockbuster destined for IMAX screens had been shot on a consumer-grade mirrorless body. Fraser ultimately could not stay on as principal cinematographer because he left to shoot Dune Part 2, so rising talent Oren Sofer took over. The team filmed largely on location in Thailand using small crews, natural lighting, and a near guerrilla approach that eliminated the need for massive studio sets or LED volumes. Edwards estimated this method saved tens of millions, allowing the film to look like a $200 million production for a fraction of the price. The Creator opened on September 29, 2023, 1 week earlier than originally planned, and immediately ran into Taylor Swift's Eras Tour concert film. It debuted to a disappointing 3rd place and never recovered. The final worldwide gross landed at $104 million. Edwards was blunt about the results, telling interviewers he would not be buying a yacht or even a car from its earnings. Number 10. Borderlands, 2024. The video game Borderlands has sold over 70 million copies. It has a fanatical global community, a wildly distinctive art style, and the kind of irreverent humor that practically begs for a film adaptation. Lionsgate agreed. They announced the project in 2015 and spent nearly a decade trying to get it right. but they did not. And here's the thing, the cast of Borderlands was almost absurdly stacked. It was a collection of Oscar winners, franchise anchors, and proven box office names assembled around one of gaming's most beloved properties. Behind the scenes, Roth emphasized building practical sets, physically constructing the junk-piled landscapes of Pandora rather than relying entirely on green screen. But the trouble started in post-production. By January 2023, the film required 2 weeks of reshoots, and Roth was unavailable because he had moved on to direct the slasher film, Thanksgiving. Tim Miller then stepped in to handle the new footage. Meanwhile, Craig Mazin quietly removed his name from the writing credits and was replaced by a pseudonym, Joe Crombie. Reports surfaced that the film was stuck in post-production hell. Lionsgate CEO John Feltheimer later acknowledged that everything that could go wrong did go wrong. Borderlands finally opened to just $8.8 million domestically. The worldwide gross barely crossed $33 million. Number 9. Lightyear, 2022. Between 1995 and 2019, the Toy Story franchise grossed over $3.3 billion worldwide. It was Pixar's crown jewel. 4 films, 4 critical hits, 4 box office triumphs. So when Disney and Pixar announced Lightyear, a standalone origin story about the fictional astronaut who inspired the Buzz Lightyear toy, the assumption was simple. This would print money. In reality, it did the opposite. And here's the thing, the concept required explanation, and that was the first problem. Lightyear is a spin-off of the Toy Story franchise. It was an ambitious, self-referential premise. On paper, it was clever. On screen, it was totally confusing. The budget was $200 million. Pixar assembled a voice cast that included Evans, Keke Palmer, Taika Waititi, and James Brolin. The animation was gorgeous. Reviews were generally positive, but none of it mattered because the core audience simply did not understand what the movie was. Pixar's own chief creative officer, Pete Docter, later admitted the studio asked too much of the audience, adding that when people hear Buzz, they expect the entire Toy Story gang, and instead, they got dropped into a hard sci-fi film they were not prepared for. There was also the damage Pixar had done to its own theatrical brand. Soul, Luca, and Turning Red, 3 films with a combined production budget exceeding $500 million, had all been sent directly to Disney Plus without a meaningful theatrical window. The film was also banned in 14 countries over a same-sex kiss that Disney initially cut from the film, then restored during the controversy surrounding Florida's parental rights in education legislation. The ban shut the movie out of major international markets. Lightyear opened to $51 million domestically. It finished with $226 million worldwide. The total loss was approximately $106 million. The director, Angus MacLane, and producer Galen Sussman both lost their jobs at Pixar after the huge loss. Number 8. Mickey 17, 2025. After Parasite won Best Picture at the 2020 Academy Awards, Bong Joon-ho became the most sought-after filmmaker on the planet, the first South Korean director to win the Oscar, the first non-English language film to claim the top prize. It was a cultural earthquake. Hollywood did not just knock on his door, it kicked it down. So Warner Brothers offered him something no studio had ever given him before: a blockbuster budget, full creative control, and one of the biggest movie stars alive. The result was Mickey 17. But the result at the box office was a disaster. The film was adapted from Edward Ashton's 2022 novel Mickey 7 and starred Robert Pattinson in a dual role as expendable human clones sent on suicide missions to help colonize an ice planet called Niflheim. The budget climbed to $118 million. For a filmmaker whose most expensive previous English-language project was Snowpiercer, this was uncharted territory. But here's the thing. Right from the very beginning, the production was not smooth at all. Reports surfaced that Warner Brothers had assembled a rival cut of the film after Bong's version tested poorly with early audiences. Bong vetoed it. He kept his vision intact. Mickey 17 opened to $19 million domestically. Number 7. Strange World, 2022. Walt Disney Animation Studios has a pattern. Every decade or so, it attempts a science fiction adventure, and every time, audiences reject it. Atlantis: The Lost Empire underperformed in 2001. Treasure Planet became one of the biggest animated bombs in history in 2002. 2 decades later, Strange World continued the tradition with breathtaking efficiency. The production budget sat at $180 million. But here's the thing. The marketing campaign was where Disney's strategy collapsed. Strange World was largely sidelined in Disney's promotional calendar in favor of that year's bigger animated release, Lightyear, which itself bombed. By the time Strange World arrived, the studio had already burned audience goodwill and marketing bandwidth on a film that had just failed. Social media reactions to Strange World's release indicated that many potential audience members were not even aware of the film's existence or release date. Strange World debuted to just $4.2 million on its opening day. By the end of its theatrical run, the worldwide gross was just $74 million. Number 6. Tron Ares, 2025.
So I think the big advantages of building these assets, like the life cycle.
The original Tron from 1982 was a commercial underperformer that became a cult phenomenon. Tron Legacy arrived 28 years later in 2010, opened to $44 million domestically, and ultimately grossed over $400 million worldwide. So when Disney greenlit a third entry, the logic was sound. The franchise had a loyal fan base, nostalgia was bankable, and artificial intelligence as a concept had never been more relevant to everyday conversation. On paper, Tron Ares should have been the right film at the right time. Instead, it became another very expensive lesson in the difference between brand recognition and audience demand. Behind the scenes, Joachim Running was hired to direct. The cast featured Jared Leto as Ares, Greta Lee, Evan Peters, Hassan Minhaj, and Jodie Turner-Smith, with Jeff Bridges returning to connect the film to Legacy. The production budget was reported at $180 million before marketing. Disney distributed the film across more than 4,000 theaters. Tron Ares debuted to $33.5 million domestically. Number 5. Joker, Folie à Deux, 2024.
Clean yourself up.
You like that one, Arthur? Let's go.
In 2019, Joker did something unprecedented. A grim R-rated character study about a mentally ill man in clown paint grossed over $1 billion worldwide on a production budget of just $65 million. Warner Brothers had one of the most profitable films in its history, and the question was never whether a sequel would happen. The question was how much the studio was willing to bet on it. The answer was $200 million. The conceptual gamble was staggering. Phillips made a bold, deeply polarizing creative choice. He turned the sequel into a musical film, not a conventional blockbuster continuation, not an expansion of the Joker's world into a broader DC universe. A courtroom drama intercut with fantasy musical sequences. Though the idea was artistically daring, at the same time, it was also commercial suicide. The bro demographic that had championed the first film's anti-establishment energy recoiled at the sight of Joaquin Phoenix singing and dancing. Joker opened to $37.8 million domestically. It became the first Hollywood comic book movie in history to earn a D cinema score from audiences. The final worldwide gross limped to $208 million. Deadline calculated the net loss at $144 million, making it the single biggest box office bomb of 2024. Number 4. The Flash, 2023. Warner Brothers spent over a decade trying to get a solo Flash movie made. Directors came and went. Scripts were rewritten endlessly. At various points, the film was supposed to launch an entirely new DC timeline. Then it was supposed to close the old one. And then it was supposed to do both simultaneously. By the time cameras finally rolled under director Andy Muschietti, the production budget had swollen to $220 million. And here's the thing. The film's biggest problem had nothing to do with the script at all. Behind the scenes, Ezra Miller became the subject of a cascading series of controversies that included assault allegations, disorderly conduct arrests, burglary charges, and accusations of grooming minors. Warner Brothers had every reason to shelve the project or recast the lead. They did neither. Studio leadership remained adamant that no other actor could play the role, and the film pushed forward toward its June 2023 release. The decision to keep Miller proved catastrophic. In fact, the film could not secure a major promotional partner, largely because Miller was unable to participate in traditional press tours. Then the entire movie leaked on social media before opening weekend. The Flash opened to roughly $55 million domestically over a 3-day weekend and $61 million over the 4-day holiday frame. The film finished its theatrical run with $271 million worldwide. Against combined production and marketing costs estimated in excess of $400 million, losses were projected at approximately $200 million. Number 3. Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, 2023. Harrison Ford spent a decade pushing for one more Indiana Jones film. He loved the character and believed there was still a story worth telling. Disney agreed, wrote a very large check, and in 2023, the result became one of the most expensive box office disappointments in Hollywood history. And here's the thing, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny was the first entry in the franchise not directed by Steven Spielberg. Post-production costs alone reached $79 million, bringing the total production budget to a staggering $387.2 million. That figure made it the third most expensive movie ever produced at the time. On set, Ford also suffered a shoulder injury during production that halted filming and added further delays in costs. The de-aging technology used to portray a younger Harrison Ford in the film's World War II prologue was one of the most ambitious applications of the technique ever attempted, with ILM training machine learning algorithms on footage of Ford from Raiders of the Lost Ark, The Empire Strikes Back, and other 1980s films. The result was a 25-minute opening sequence that drew significant attention. When Indiana Jones opened, the critical reception was mixed. The film earned $60.4 million domestically. Number 2. The Marvels, 2023. For 33 films spanning 15 years, the Marvel Cinematic Universe had never produced a genuine box office bomb. Not one. Even the weaker entries had cleared $500 million worldwide. The brand was considered financially invincible. Then the Marvels arrived and proved that even the most dominant franchise in modern entertainment history could crater. The production budget was roughly $220 million. Prints, advertising, and distribution added another $110 million. The concept linked the three heroes through entangled powers. The cast was committed. The visual effects were polished. The film was, by most measures, competently made. Then came the SAG-AFTRA strike. The cast was unable to do any promotional work or press during the strike, and only sprang into action on the Thursday night before release when the strike officially ended. In fact, Brie Larson appeared on The Tonight Show on Friday, while she and her co-stars surprised fans at screenings in New York City over the opening weekend. Despite all these, the Marvels opened to $46 million domestically, the lowest debut in MCU history. The worldwide gross limped to $206 million, making it the lowest-grossing MCU film of all time. Number 1. Megalopolis, 2024. Francis Ford Coppola directed The Godfather Part 2, The Conversation, and Apocalypse Now within a single decade. He is arguably the greatest American filmmaker who ever lived, and at 85 years old, he sold portions of his winery empire, borrowed over $100 million against his wine business, and poured $120 million of his own money into a film that no studio in Hollywood would touch. Every major distributor turned him down. Every one. He made it anyway. That decision defines Megalopolis. It defines its brilliance and its tragedy in equal measure. During production, a retro-futuristic fable set in a version of New York City was modeled on the fall of the Roman Republic. Adam Driver starred as Caesar Catalina, a visionary architect trying to build a utopian future. The ambition was staggering, but the execution divided audiences down the middle. Megalopolis opened in just 1,700 theaters and made $4 million in its opening weekend. The worldwide gross settled at $14.4 million. A year later, the financial shockwaves were still hitting. Coppola gave up a lease on his private island in Belize. He put 7 luxury watches up for auction, including a $1 million FP Journe he had helped design, telling the New York Times he needed to keep the ship afloat. And that is the real story of sci-fi in this decade so far. The genre that imagines the future keeps getting punished by the present. If you made it this far, drop a comment telling us which film on this list deserved better. And if you haven't already, subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next.